to sit back here if that's okay. Oh my God, you're all dark. That's better. I'm going to tell you a true story about a friend of mine called Helen. And the story starts in the mid-'80s when Helen was in her early 20s, and she had two goals in life. One was to change the world, and the other was to find herself a hot boyfriend and settle down and have kids. So on the former goal, that was going pretty well. She was a very committed and extremely capable political activist, doing all sorts of campaigns on all sorts of issues, rescuing animals from vivisection laboratories, sabotaging fox hunting, gluing up butchers' shop windows, and then moving on from animals, she was involved in the miners' strike and all sorts of things, some of which had massive successes, notably the poll tax and the campaign which she was involved in, but as were many other people, including lots of you, I'm sure. Obviously, the poll tax campaign won and arguably helped depose Margaret Thatcher. Also, testing cosmetics on animals was eventually overturned. Fox hunting was eventually banned. So on the campaigning front, things were going quite well. And then on the hot boyfriend front, things also were looking up in the mid-'80s when a new guy arrived in the activist group Helen was part of, and he was called John. And he was pretty hot. He was pretty muscly. Apparently I never met him, but apparently his thighs were so big he couldn't cross his legs. But he did have a mullet haircut, which I have to say was absolutely awful, but didn't put Helen off. And he tried to woo her with kind of Valentine's cards and stuff like that, but wasn't having much luck. But then one night he turned up at her house completely distraught, and basically over the course of this night told her his whole story. He was an only child, he didn't have any siblings, his father had died recently, he was abused by his parents, and then the latest thing is that his mum had just died in New Zealand and he hadn't got enough money to go to the funeral. So he was devastated. So Helen, being the compassionate and kind person she is, offered to lend him her savings, which was £300, which was a hell of a lot of money to her then. And he took the money and he flew away to New Zealand to the funeral, from where he wrote her a love letter, including a phrase in Maori, which really worked. And when he came back, they got together. And she says that she couldn't believe how intense it was and how quickly she fell utterly and totally and completely head over heels in love with this man. And it was uncanny how perfect they were for each other. She didn't believe in the whole soulmate concept at all, but he was her soulmate. They believed in the same things, they fought for the same things, they wanted the same things. And very quickly, this relationship progressed. They moved in together in London, and then they decided to start trying to achieve their dream, which was to live on the land, have a small holding, grow their own food, and bring up their children. And so they moved up to Yorkshire, and they were staying temporarily in a caravan. It was around this time that the first kind of wobble started, and he started having some mental health problems and a lot of anxiety and sort of depression, and saying that anybody he'd loved before in his life had abandoned him or left him, and he was so scared that Helen would leave him, and so on and so forth. And then one day Helen came back to the caravan and found a note. He'd gone. He said he couldn't cope anymore. He was gone. And she was absolutely, totally devastated. This was before the time of mobile phones, of course, so she couldn't call him. She didn't know if he was alive or dead. She was very, very worried that he'd killed himself. And she didn't hear anything for a long time. And then she got a postcard from South Africa, postmarked South Africa, saying that he'll always love her, and he hoped one day that he would be well enough that they could be together. Meanwhile, other events in Helen's life were overtaking her, because the activist group that she'd been part of, that John had also been part of, 5 activists within the group had been sued by McDonald's, the burger people, for libel about a leaflet that the activist group had written. Helen herself had not actually written it, but she had been distributing it. 5 activists were sued, and they got all this legal advice, and the legal advice was just Don't do it. It's an impossible battle. You can't fight McDonald's. All these people have had legal troubles before, including the BBC, The Guardian, The Sunday Times, Morrissey, Linda McCartney, and everybody has backed down and apologised. Basically, McDonald's are using the legal system to stifle criticism. You haven't got a hope in hell against them. Back down and apologise. So 4 of the 5 activists said, fair enough. Because if they had taken on the fight, they could lose their house, they could lose everything they own, and potentially even go to jail in the worst case scenario. But Helen said, no, I can't apologise. In fact, McDonald's should be apologising to us for the damage that they do to society and to the environment. At which point, one of the other activists, one of the other 4, Dave Morris, he said, well, if you're going to fight, I'll fight with you, because 2's better than 1. And so they became the McLibel 2, who I hope you've all heard of, who fought this epic battle against McDonald's. And that's how I came to know Helen. I first met her 20 years ago when I approached them saying, could I please make a documentary about your trial against McDonald's? Because it was the most inspiring thing I'd ever heard, that these 2 people dared to stand up against McDonald's. And that was, as I say, was 20 years ago. Anyway, so she started fighting the trial. Sorry, I just got to look at my notes. What's that, Lizzie? What? Oh, Lizzie says, my producer says the DVDs are on sale. So Helen starts fighting McDonald's in court. McDonald's have got the best libel lawyers in the country, paying £2,000 a day with this huge team of solicitors, and Helen and Dave are defending themselves. And it's in the Royal Courts of Justice, which I'm sure you all know is on the Strand, and right next to there, it's actually moved now, but anyway, it was St. Catherine's House, the birth and records place. So Helen used to walk past there every day, and one day she just suddenly thought, I'm going to go in there and look for John's birth certificate. So she goes, because she knew his name and where he was born and all that, and she finds the birth certificate. It all looks completely legit and fine, no problem, and his parents' names and everything are there. So she decides to go up to Derby and knock on the door of the parents' house and see if they've seen him. Does so, knocks on the door, they're not in. Back to McLibel, carrying on. It's now becoming the longest court case in English history, 313 days in court, backwards and forwards past St. Catherine's House. And then she thinks, I'm going to look for a death certificate. Maybe he's dead. So she starts looking for the death certificate, obviously starts looking for a 30-year-old man or whatever age he was then. Can't find it, but keeps looking, and eventually finds the death certificate of John Barker, the guy with the parents and the grown-up in Derby, the guy, but he died aged 8 of leukemia, which means that her John was not who he said he was. And which also means that she knocked on the door of the family of a child that had died of leukemia 30 years earlier, and if they'd answered the door, she would have asked after him, saying that she was his girlfriend, which would have been horrific for her and for them. At which point, the person she loves most in the world doesn't exist. She says that she then lost all track of reality. And normally when great traumas happen to us, we talk to our friends, of course, but she said that because the person she was closest to didn't exist, she couldn't understand whether anybody existed, whether anybody was who they said they were, and she ended up not being able to talk to anybody. Then McLibel ends. I'm sure you all know what happens. If you haven't, there's a good film you can watch. Basically, McDonald's and Helen and Dave won about half each legally, and Helen and Dave, given the inequality between the two sides, that was a massive victory for Helen and Dave, and they scored some huge points, one of which is that they proved that McDonald's exploit children with their advertising. I think that was probably the most damaging one for McDonald's, and in fact led to a new law banning junk food advertising on TV. But more importantly for McDonald's, Helen and Dave definitely won in the kind of court of public opinion. Channel 4 called it the worst corporate PR disaster in history, and McDonald's profits dived, and they closed loads of stores all around the world. And so it was a great triumph for Helen and Dave. But Helen, of course, was not feeling happy. And now she was free of the trial. She had time and she basically became a detective. And she spent 17 years searching for John. It would make a good film, wouldn't it? But to cut a long story short, she ends up holding a marriage certificate of John, who she now knows is called John Dines, marrying. Now, it would be bad enough if I found out that my boyfriend was in fact married to somebody the whole time I was with him, but what was completely and totally and utterly devastating for her was when she saw the job title that he'd listed, and she knew it was his marriage certificate because she recognised his handwriting. Job title, police officer. And she said for about a year or two after that, she managed to just hold on to hope that maybe, okay, he was a police officer, but perhaps he'd been a police officer before he met her. Perhaps, he'd actually, changed to become a genuine political activist, and he was so embarrassed that he had been a cop that he couldn't bear to tell her, and she was hanging on to that. But then this is now 2009, and then it started coming out in the press about other police spies. Mark Kennedy was the first one, and it was really thanks to a couple of journalists at The Guardian, Rob Evans and Paul Lewis, who did a brilliant investigation, culminating in their fantastic book Undercover, which I highly recommend. And basically, it turned out that in 1968, a secret unit within the special branch was created called the SDS, the Special Demonstration Squad, with the aim of spying on campaigners, political activists. And believe it or not, in the 50 years since then, at least 100, we don't know exactly how many spies have been in that group, and they have infiltrated, I still can't believe this number, maybe I've just got it wrong, but they've infiltrated 460 activist groups. So that means that if any of you in this room have been involved in any campaign in the last 50 years, whether it's climate, whether it's miners, whether it's poll tax, whether it's left-wing, right-wing, gay rights, anything, peace campaigners, you've most likely been working alongside spies. In fact, it's pitch dark actually out there, which is quite good. There is undoubtedly spies here right now. You're laughing, but there is undoubtedly spies here right now. So if they are here, would you perhaps like to stand up? I'm sure they are standing up. I can't see, it's pitch black. I'm joking, but I'm not joking. And that's what our tax-paying money is going on. So all of my films, the McLibel film I made with Helen took 10 years to make, partly because the bloody trial went on and on and on, became the longest trial in history, but also because I'm pretty slow. And plus we do it, and we raise all the money and all the rest of it, and then we distribute them. Anyway, the point is that to choose to make a film about somebody, that somebody has to be extremely special to dedicate so many years of my life to, because I'm not going to be able to make that many. But there is only one person who I'm now choosing to make a second film about, and that person is, of course, Helen. And we're not making a film, actually, we're making a 4-part TV drama. It's called Undercovers, and as the intro said, we are very, very, very honoured that Tony Garnett, who was Ken Loach's producer, he produced Cares and Kathy Come Home. He's really the godfather of getting political drama onto TV. He's come out of retirement to work on Undercovers with us. His only condition, well, he had a few conditions, but one of them was he's never, ever, ever accepting any money. He never wants to get paid, which I've never heard from anybody before. And the other person who's helping us is Simon Beaufoy, who wrote Slumdog Millionaire and The Full Monty. He's our kind of script editor. We're trying to have our cake and eat it. We want to use crowdfunding, but we also want to get it onto TV, of course, and work with the broadcaster. So far, we've raised £800,000. If any of you would like to invest and buy shares in our company, you can talk to my producer, who you can't see, but she's down there. She's called Lizzie. And I'm sorry I can't talk to you afterwards, because I'm going to have to rush off and get the last train back to Devon to feed my baby. But feeding her baby is what Helen will not be doing tonight, because what the police did to her, ultimately, is they robbed her of the chance to have a family of her own. She spent 18 years searching for John, and remember that John wrote that letter saying, one day he would be back. It was because of that. Given that he was a police officer, he did not need to say that. He could have said, I'm gone forever, that's it, and then she would have been able to get over it more easily. Anyway, she spent her entire fertile years searching for him, and then eventually, by the time she found out he was a police officer, and she was able to recover a little bit and find another boyfriend and so on and so forth, it was just, she was too old. She was not able to have a child. And for what? For what reason did they do this to Helen? Because she was trying to fight for a fairer world. She believes that the world as it's currently run, for the profits and of a small elite, the 1%, at the expense of the 99%, is not right. And we should have a fairer world. We should have a world where children are not exploited by the advertising of multinational corporations, where animals are treated fairly, where workers are paid a decent living wage, and where the environment is protected to keep us all safe. And so really what she was trying to do was standing up for all of us. And that's why I think we should all now stand up for her. And for all the other women that the police did this to as well. Thank you.